What an amazing crowd. Such a huge honor to be here today, and thank you so much to the Strand for hosting. My name is Mickey Rowe. My pronouns are he, him. Oh, here, should we on or off? If you are blind or low vision, please know that I am a white man wearing a suit with pink pants and brown hair and glasses on. And the room we are in is so beautiful and full of old books and awesome string lights.
I feel like it's also very sensory too. I can smell it actually.
Yeah.
The old books. I hope that's not a thing that I'm just enjoying because my mask is off, but I promise it smells good. So hi everyone, I'm Emily Ladau. My pronouns are she, her. I cannot believe how many beautiful people there are here. I'm just so happy to be here. And Mickey is amazing. This is actually our first time meeting in person, so you get to have a little peek at what our conversation would be if we were honestly just chilling in the green room, because we were already having this conversation.
Truly.
So how about we get started?
And we will also make sure to open it all up for questions from you all halfway through. So if you have questions, please feel free to think of questions and we will make sure to get to those too.
Okay, so I came prepared with questions because selfishly, this is just my opportunity to ask Mickey a bunch of questions. So I'm really excited. But first of all, I want to congratulate you on your book coming out. I'm so excited about it. I hope you will all get yourselves a copy. It is honestly one of my new favorite books, and I think the reason that I like it so much is because there's so many stories about disability that are just missing from the world, right? And we're filling those gaps every time we have a new book published. So, Mickey, first of all, congratulations. I hope you'll give one more round of applause. Okay, so can we talk about our journeys coming into disability as an identity? It's a culture for us, right? It's part of who we are. It's something that we use to define ourselves in so many ways. Yet we live in this world where people say that disability is shameful, it's taboo. I mean, I was just literally having a conversation with somebody online the other day where no matter how many times I said, I'm really proud that disability is a part of me, they said, no, actually it's a bad thing. And I'm gonna tell you why it's a bad thing. So can we talk about that? What was that journey like for you coming into this identity?
Absolutely. So honestly, for the longest time, even though I knew I was autistic, even though I knew I needed large print font to read because of my vision, I was just telling the story to someone. I felt so much shame around identifying as having a disability, and so much shame around even asking for the accommodations that I needed. That through school, from the time I was in elementary school through high school, you know, I was in special education. I had big, huge, large print books from the Talking Book and Braille Library. And all these accommodations all through high school. And when I went to college, I was just telling someone, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to not appear as being needy or all of these things people think about disability, because this is the internalized ableism we have. So I actually tried in college to not ask for the accommodations that I needed and not tell anyone that I was disabled, which was not a good idea. I couldn't read any of the textbooks or tests. I actually stopped going to class for quite a while because I couldn't even read anything that was happening when I was in class. So not ideal, but yeah. So a huge reason that I wanted to write this book is because I feel all of us, whether we are disabled or not, so often we are trying so desperately to fit in that we really forget what makes us stand out. And I wanted to show everyone, disabled or not, that there is no shame about the things that make you different. You do not have to feel badly about the things that you think are wrong or you might think might make you burdens. That when you are open with all of you and everything that makes you unique, and when you give all of yourself to the world, you are honestly giving the world such a huge gift. So I think that's part of why I wanted to write this.
Yeah, and I love that messaging precisely because I'm constantly grappling with the idea that I am too much.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very ironic because I call myself a professional disabled person.
Yeah.
I joke that I'm just disability 24/7. You know, I can't take it off and put it on a shelf at night. It's still part of me when I'm done with work for the day. And yet, even if I'm all, yay, disability, I'm also really struggling internally with feeling like a burden. And I have a quick story, and I imagine you may be able to relate about feeling like a burden in relationships in your life. And so, funny enough, several years ago, just as I was in the early days of dating my boyfriend, we were going to be going on a date in this exact room right here to see a lecture, and there was a problem with the elevator at Union Square, and I got stuck on the platform, and I called him and I said, oh my God, I'm stuck on the platform, this is it, you're probably gonna break up with me, we're gonna miss the event, I think we're done, nice knowing you. And he said, no, actually I'm gonna come to get you off the platform and I'm gonna stay with you. And it turned into a complete debacle. There were firefighters and paramedics who carried me up the stairs. It was highly embarrassing. And I thought to myself, we're done, that's it. Like, I'm never gonna hear from him again. I should give him more credit than that because he's somewhere in this room tonight. I won't point him out. I won't point him out. Oh, someone pointed him out. But I wanted to say, you know, it's a really full circle moment for me being in this room and still trying to remember all these years later, no, you are not a burden.
Absolutely. What, you know, one of the stories in Fearlessly Different is, so often I think as disabled people, we can be told that we would be so lucky to get to marry anyone, that we need to just accept whatever love comes our way because we're disabled. And so we should just accept the first person who wants to marry us because likely no one else will ever want to marry you. That it'll be so hard to find someone to want to be with you as a partner. And it can be so damaging because it can lead so many disabled people, myself included, to be in really abusive, dangerous relationships. And so another reason I wanted to write the book is to make sure everyone knew that you are worthy of love. And there are so many people who would want to, disabled people are sexy and powerful and brilliant and some of the best creative problem solvers in the world because we have to creatively problem solve every day to navigate a world that wasn't designed for us. So I really wanted people to know, one, that you are worthy of love, but also to get my warning and what happened to me so that they know it is not worth settling for someone just because you think you won't get to be with anyone else ever again, that they might be the only person who wants to marry you, because you can get into such really dangerous and scary situations so quickly and easily. And there is so much time. There is so much time, and you will find someone who really, really wants to be with you and who wants to treat you appropriately.
I feel like everybody needs a Mickey following them around, like a hype man, right? Yes. Where were you when I was looking for someone a few years ago? I feel like I needed that encouragement. But you're absolutely right, and I want to acknowledge that we are talking about things that are actually kind of messy, right? I think there's this expectation that when we talk about disability, it's going to be all sunshine and roses, and here we are, these inspiring disabled people who have overcome the odds to be here tonight. And, you know, I try to push back against that narrative sometimes. And how do we hold space for that? How do we hold space for the fact that on the one hand, we're trying to be up here saying we are living proof that disability is not a bad thing, while at the same time saying, okay, but sometimes it's actually really hard.
Well, I think it's a reframing of disability isn't a bad thing, but ableism is a bad thing. But in addition to that reframing, you know, something you and I have kind of talked about before is at the beginning of Fearlessly Different, I think it almost feels like it's going to maybe be an inspiration. well, I can say the word. It's going to be an inspiration porn story, a little bit.
Nikki, oh my goodness.
I'm so sorry. And one thing that was really important to me is, because I'm hoping a lot of non-disabled people read this book as well. And I'm hoping lots of people will read this book where it might be their first time coming in contact with some of the ideas that we carry in disability culture. And I think it's really important to meet people where they're at, meet people where they feel comfortable, and then once you've met them where they're at and where they feel comfortable, grab their hand, and then figure out how quickly you can walk over to where you want them to be. So I think in both of our books a little bit, we really tried to do that and tried to start the book in a way that would feel really comfortable and enticing and exciting to people who maybe have never experienced disability before, and then slowly throughout the story, almost use the book like a Trojan horse. I like to say I tried to use Fearlessly Different like a Trojan horse, and give people a story that they can really connect with and will be really exciting to them, and then use that Trojan horse to give them information about disability culture that they might need. And so that hopefully by the end of the book, they're in a completely different place than where they were when they started the book.
I believe the term you used, or when we were talking, was, start out slow and then just burn it all down.
Yeah, burn it all down by the end of the book.
Which honestly I appreciate. And I think that's something that we need to talk about. How do we meet people where they're at in these conversations? I know this was something I struggled with a lot when I was writing my book. I wanted to be accessible to people. I wanted people to not feel alienated by disability. And I did in fact want to demystify it. And then at the same time, if you happen to read some of the reviews of my book, which I don't recommend, never read your reviews, but when I was a little baby author a few months ago, reading my reviews, there were some people who were saying, well, this is not radical enough, and you're not enough of an activist, and you're causing more harm than good. And then there were people who were saying, oh my God, this is so radical, I want nothing to do with this, I'm not subscribing to this at all, this is not my brand of activism. And so how do we respond to people who have decided that we are not enough or we are too much of something? Have you encountered that in your work, in your writing, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think we were talking a little bit even just in the green room about this, and it's, gosh, let me put my thoughts together for a minute. But I think all forms of activism are so valid, and we need all different types of activism. We need people who are saying, I am not willing to have conversations with these people. That's great, and that is so valid. But my form of activism is also equally valid, where I try to be someone who will say, you know what, I am willing to have a conversation with you. I'm willing to meet you where you're at and have the conversation and so same with you, Emily, I think, that we think often it is easier to change minds and hearts and opinions from the inside than it is from the outside, I think. So we have both had conversations with groups that we may not agree with and people who we definitely don't agree with, but we try to have those conversations with love and generosity and listening to them, which might to some activists seem really not okay, but I think that they need to feel listened to, and they need to feel not necessarily that we agree with them, but that we at least understand them, if we're going to ask in return that they also understand our point of view and be willing to consider moving to the disabled side with us.
That's exactly my brand of activism, so I think we're very much on the same page. And I think this is a good point to acknowledge, though, that we come to this work with a degree of privilege, right? And a lot of people use that to push back on me. I know they say, you don't understand what it's like to have my disability or to have my child's disability. You don't understand that experience. You have so much privilege because you communicate verbally, and they like to use the term high functioning for me, which, speaking of burning things down, I'm not a fan of functioning labels because I don't think they make any sense because every human being functions differently. and what standard are we measuring it by? But I'll get off my soapbox on that. But
one thing I just want to add, one thing I heard too is that like functioning labels are great if you are describing like a computer or a machine. Like a machine can function well or not function well for its job, but like we are human beings, and functioning labels can be so capitalist sometimes too if we are simply judging someone by their ability to participate in capitalism. and also that sorry, one more thought. I was non-speaking when I was younger, and now I have a kid also who is frequently sometimes non-speaking and uses alternate forms of communication. But I think that when we assign labels to people's intelligence based on how they can communicate, it doesn't work well because there are so many incredible activists and so many awesome books written by people who use AAC devices or who don't speak verbally but type well, or there are infinite ways to communicate that are all equally acceptable and brilliant. And when we assume that someone is not intelligent simply because they can't verbally speak, it can be really damaging. A great book that I think everyone should also read after they read Demystifying Disability and Fearlessly Different is The Reason I Jump by Naoki Higashida. And it is so wonderful to remind people that all forms of communication are valid, and that just because someone cannot communicate verbally with you does not mean that they are not brilliant and articulate and not understanding everything that other people are saying so well.
I ran out, honestly, and picked that book up. I was at a used bookstore with my boyfriend, and I saw the book, and I was like, Mickey just recommended this to me, I'm gonna get it. And also, just in case it offers some clarity, AAC is augmentative and alternative communication. So if you've ever seen somebody using a board and kind of typing on it or pointing at letters, that would be a way for them to communicate instead of verbally. And so, I'm glad you added these qualifiers about functioning, but I want to go back to this conversation of privilege, because I don't think we can have this conversation without acknowledging the fact that it took privilege to be here, and we exist in this interesting paradox of being marginalized and also being privileged, and having gotten to where we are and still having to claw and fight for it at the same time. And so I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about how do we balance that? How do we balance that knowledge? Because for me, it's a constant push-pull, a constant need to ask myself, when do I take a step back? When is it my turn to listen, to amplify, to learn? And even as somebody who wrote a book on disability, I'm always reminding people, I am not the sole authority on disability. I didn't write the Bible on disability. I didn't write the Encyclopedia of Disability. I'm one person. So, what would you say to somebody who said, well, you're here and you have privilege and you don't speak for me?
Yeah, that's absolutely true and absolutely valid. I am here and I do have privilege, and I do not speak for everyone, nor should I attempt to speak for everyone. I think the way I try to handle those situations is, one, by being aware of that privilege myself, and then the way I try to amplify. The whole time you were talking, it was reminding me of a meeting I was in, a really frustrating meeting, but I was in a meeting at a really, really large regional theater, working on a show, and there were conversations happening in the room about a disabled trans character, and the conversation was, it doesn't matter how the conversation was going or what was being said, but I
assume not good.
What I finally said is, this conversation, I'm looking around, realizing my privilege as a white cis man, and I was like, there are no trans folks in the room right now, and it is not okay for us to even be having this conversation without trans people in the room. So we need to pause this conversation. We need to find some disabled trans people who who are not employed by this theater, because then there's a power dynamic of employer-employee, and do not work for the company that I was working for, because then there's a power dynamic. Just find some like trans folks who are activists who are willing to be a part of this conversation, because it is not appropriate for us to be having this conversation without those voices in the room.
Well, first of all, you gave me the perfect segue into my next question. Thank you. And also, I think there's a fine line, right, between let's not tokenize people and just grab any old representation of a community off the street and say, hey, speak for everyone, tell us your thoughts, and we're going to use you to make this right. But at the same time, authentic representation is so important. And I think you, especially as an actor, probably have so much to say on the subject of authentic representation. But I wanted to talk about what it means to actually get to see yourself represented after so many years of not having yourself reflected back at you. Because I know, for me personally, and my mom says that I'm milking this way too much, but when I was 10, I was on Sesame Street. So, sorry, Mom. But I bring it up to say that at the time, I don't think I realized the power of being representation for someone else. But what I knew in that moment was that my story mattered. And that was really powerful to me. And I think your book sends that message. So I want to talk about that more. Let's talk about authentic representation and the power it holds, not just for people to see the representation, but also the impact that it has on us as disabled people.
All that's coming to my mind right now, I think the moment I realized how powerful authentic representation was is because it was not something I ever experienced. I'm thinking about all the movies that I grew up with about autism. I'm thinking about Rain Man. I'm thinking about The Good Doctor. I'm thinking about this whole list of shows up until As We See It. I think I see Andrew Duff in the back, who is on this awesome TV show on Amazon called As We See It, which is, I think, the first major TV show that I can think of that where the lead actors and all the actors are autistic. So everyone should check out Andrew Duff on As We See It. But before that, really growing up, I didn't see authentic representation as the norm. And the moment I realized how powerful it was is Mehri and I were doing Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime at Indiana Repertory Theater, and my phone started blowing up from all sorts of autistic individuals writing me, letting me know that their life had changed just because of the knowledge that a theater had chosen to cast the show in the way that they did. These were people who did not live in Indianapolis. These were people who were never going to get to see the show, were not planning on seeing the show, but just the knowledge that a theater had said, you matter, your voice in this conversation has value, and you matter, was so life-changing to them that they would write me many huge, long emails and Facebook messages and Instagram messages. And I think that's when I realized representation matters, because I think young people with disabilities really need to see positive role models that will say, if you are different, if you access the world differently, we need you, the world needs you. And when we exclude people with disabilities from stories that are entirely about disability, that unfortunately doesn't help to make that happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the outpouring of messages that you got, because one of the things that I have loved so much about having a book out in the world is people are messaging me and they're saying, my child who is 2 or 3 years old and is not yet reading books, thought the book was for them, picked it up and said, look at the people on the cover. And then it starts a conversation. Yeah. And that was my biggest dream, was to start a conversation. And so if nothing else, if you see that representation and you're curious about it in that very healthy way that I think a lot of children are, they want to know, they want to understand the world around them. That's what I'm hoping for. And so that kind of response and just knowing that you are influencing the conversation in a positive direction to say it's actually okay to talk about disability, I think that in and of itself is so powerful. And that's another question though that I have is, at the same time that we are laying ourselves bare for people, and you way more so than I did. I mean, you really laid yourself bare in this book. This feels like Vicky's tell-all memoir in a way. And for me, I feel like my book is more, it's got some of me, but then it's more broadly about disability. And so how do you balance that needing to tell your story to educate people, but also not owing all of yourself to people at the same time? I think that's a question we don't have enough as disabled people. We're constantly asked to educate other people, but what is it like to take ownership of that story?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think personally for me, for me as an autistic person, I sort of have to be vulnerable every single day just to exist. When I meet someone for coffee, or I'm passing someone who I kind of know on the street and have to say hi to them and have some small talk with them as we pass ways on the street, that feels so intensely vulnerable for me, because my whole life I have been trying to have human connection and failing, and trying to have human connection and failing over and over again, trying and failing, to the point that just attempting human connection feels really scary and vulnerable. So because of that, for me personally, it feels really easy and safe to be really vulnerable and open-hearted in a book. To write that down in a book feels so much easier and safer than trying to do it one-on-one with someone. So yeah, it's super easy for me to be vulnerable on stage or in a book. But at the same time, it does feel really funny. I think if I can segue a little bit into just employment and us trying to make money, it's estimated that up to 85% of college graduates in the United States with autism are unemployed. And then even if you can get a job, currently in the United States, even though the minimum wage I think is $7.25 an hour, if you are disabled, you are not guaranteed a minimum wage in exchange for employment the same way everyone else is. There are hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities in the US who get paid literal pennies per hour. And it can really feel, I know I struggle with unemployment so frequently I fall into that 85% of autistic college graduates who are unemployed. So because of that, it does feel really funny sometimes to think, gosh, to provide for my family, to try to make ends meet as an autistic person, I have to just rip it all open and give all of myself away in a book to try to like, that is what, it's not something that I was like, ooh, what would be fun today to write a book sharing all of myself, even though I think it's really important. I'm really glad I wrote this book, and I think it's so important, and I think everyone needs to read it. But it does feel really funny at times to think this is something I kind of had to do to try to just like make the bare minimum of, like, to try to be able to survive for my family.
Yeah, and for me, when I was in college, I thought I was going to be a high school English teacher, and then I completely shifted gears and I said, I'm going to be a disability advocate, and I have no idea what that means, but I'm going to try it. There's definitely no major for disability advocacy, but I knew that it was something I was passionate about. I don't think I realized at the time, and I wish I could go back and tell my younger self that that is going to mean bearing a lot of yourself a lot of the time. It is going to mean feeling very vulnerable and putting so much on the line. But at the same time, what I grapple with now is that I have managed to create a career out of something that is, for so many people, the reason that they are in poverty. And so that's another mode of privilege that I feel I need to acknowledge, being up here is that I am not some kind of voice for the entirety of the disability community, because I have been able to spin this into a career, and I feel very, very lucky about that. But it does also mean constantly bearing my soul to people and telling them, you know, so many parts of my story that I probably would otherwise keep private and personal. Speaking of, you know, bearing yourselves to people, I think that we are actually hitting the time for audience Q&A. So why not bare our souls a little more, right?
But also, no, before we start this, I just want to say, truly ask whatever you would like, because we are all here in this space because we all have good intention. And so there is no wrong question, there is nothing that you shouldn't ask, and there's nothing you could say that would get you in trouble or make Emily and I like shake our heads at you or anything like that. Truly, we are all here with good intention, and we are all just here to learn together. So I'm so excited to get to learn together with everyone in this room. Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Oh, gave Anthony a microphone. You know, that could be an issue. Emily, I'm so happy to see you once again. I follow you on Twitter. By the way, everybody should follow Emily on Twitter. Fantastic tweets there.
I'm going to give a shout out to Mickey too, especially on Instagram. He's a lot of fun on Instagram.
By the way, social media has been something of a godsend for the disability community, because there are so many ways that we find each other through those networks and are able to create a virtual community and become stronger and learn from each other and have a little bit of quick time in the virtual and learn about each other and learn about each other's, the edges of each other's tolerances, and also begin to understand each other better, and then can speak to things that bring us together as a community, in spite of the broad bandwidth of diversity that is represented within the disability community. It's not a monolith by any means. To that effect, I'd like to say, as a disabled person, I identify as disabled. I have an acquired disability. I'm also the proud father of a child who has a disability, born with a disability. And I am also a proud son of a father who had an acquired disability from his time in the Vietnam War. But what I would like to point out is this idea of representation. Let's think carefully about representation in media is one thing, but representation in the world around us is also a very important factor to consider. So when I go to my local businesses, I ask them, how come you don't have any disabled people working for your company? This is a thing we need to understand, is that there are disabled people everywhere, okay? But we need to have more opportunities for disabled people to be in the roles that our neurotypical compatriots are in. So, you know, I always call out the elephant in the room. Does Strand have anybody disabled working for them currently? And if not, why? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for that. And one thing I just want to add, if I can piggyback on that a little bit. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about inclusion in stories, in books, and inclusion on stage and in the movies and TV is because I think so often one of the places that doctors and employers get their information about disability is in the TV and movies and theater and books that they read. So when I was doing Curious Incident, when I wrote this book, one of my hopes was that, you know, any employer who reads this book, any employer who gets to see a play or a movie or a TV show where disabled people are in it, hopefully they get to see that, oh my gosh, you can hire people with disabilities. People with disabilities are just as professional as anyone else. People with disabilities get the job done, and you have no reason to discriminate against people with disabilities. So I think entertainment has so much power in what it gets to model for the rest of the world. Thank you for that comment.
I also want to jump in there super quickly to say, you know, when I was younger, I was constantly looking for very visible and apparent representations of disability. I was very concerned with seeing people who looked something like me, and I had that, you know, in my mom and in my uncle. And beyond that, I was in a mainstream public school, so nobody really looked like me. But what I wish I knew then that I know now is there were probably plenty of disabled kids who were in school with me. I just wasn't aware of it because I had such a narrow and limited perception and understanding of what disability was. And so I think when we're talking about representation and when we're saying, are you hiring disabled people, recognizing that disability itself is not monolithic and it looks different. Sometimes it doesn't look like anything at all. And so to me, I'm less likely to say I don't see the representation because I'm trying to pick up on the cues that indicate that it's a culture where that kind of inclusion exists. Oh, I see hand.
And I'm also happy to answer that question. We do have disabled employees on
Oh,
staff.
thank you so much, dear.
Hi, Emily.
Hey, Sabrina.
I haven't seen Emily in 3 years in person, so this is very exciting. We've mostly just been talking about Dawson's Creek on Twitter, which is great. She's so much fun. But thank you, both of you, for this wonderful conversation. Without getting too much into my personal story, I am a person with no disabilities, and my spouse, I think we're kind of figuring out that a lot of things that have been going on with him, like he's starting to frame them as disabilities for the first time, and it suddenly all makes sense, and he might possibly be on the autism spectrum. So my question is, from the perspective of, you know, the person trying to be the supportive partner, you know, what would you like to see the partners out there in the world doing? Because it does get into some tough situations when someone, you know, has ADHD and, you know, they don't do the dishes or they don't do the laundry, and then, you know, like, I want to be supportive, but it can be hard sometimes.
Do you want to answer? Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, I think that is really hard. I think as someone who is autistic and also a husband, and trying to think, because I know that there are often things that I should do or could do better as a husband, but my autism just makes it really challenging for me. I would say what I would suggest you do is ask your partner what would be helpful for them and what accommodations you can make for them, how you can help give them reminders in ways that feel supportive. But, you know, your husband partner, I don't remember if it was, your husband as he's coming to terms with his autism and his disability, he is the expert in his own lived experience. And so I would say, instead of trying to assume what accommodations he needs or doesn't need, or what he can and can't do, I always recommend the best thing is just to ask someone, hey, how can I be supportive? What do you need? What can we do to make this work? And then when they tell you, believe them, is the advice I would give.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question and how thoughtful it is. And I echo Mickey in terms of, you know, asking about needs, but it's also about having continuing and ongoing conversations. And you know, speaking of being vulnerable before, I'm going to be very vulnerable right now and say that I am constantly still learning that I need to be extremely honest with my boyfriend. Sorry, babe. I need to be extremely honest with him about how I am feeling in any given moment, whether that is physical or emotional pain. And you know, he fosters that opportunity for me to have those conversations. And so I think just getting to that point where you say, no matter what the circumstance is, no matter what situation you are in, I am here to navigate the complexity of that situation. And I know that it may not work out perfectly, and I know that we may clash in the process, but I am here for you to figure out what that looks like. I think just having somebody, you know, say, I am here for you in this moment, even when this moment is really messy, is the best thing you could look for in a partner. For anyone, not just for someone with a disability, but I know that for me, that has been life-changing, quite honestly. Someone who just looks at you and says, yeah, I know you're a complete mess, and I'm just gonna love you right through it.
Amen to that. Yeah.
Hi.
I'll repeat it. I'll repeat your question. How are you? And I'll repeat your question too, since you don't have a mic.
I can also be loud. It's not a big deal.
Mike is coming. Mike is coming.
Hi. So I'm doing my dissertation right now on using theater as a play therapy technique for children with autism. So I'm wondering your discovery of theater and how that makes you feel.
Absolutely. So I would say, when I got to go to theater for the first time, as an autistic person, I did not get a lot of social interaction. And when I did get it, it often did not feel safe. When I went to the theater for the first time, it was one of the first times that I got to experience all this incredible, nuanced social interaction happening in front of me on stage in a way that felt completely safe to me, where I just got to sit in the audience, and by sitting in the audience, I was a participant. That was all that was being requested of me, that I could be just as much a participant in this as anyone else, just by sitting and being in space with other people. And also as an autistic person, growing up, often when people spoke to me, they would speak to me in a baby voice almost, as if I was a toddler or a baby. And when I went to see theater, the actors on stage, when they were addressing the audience or addressing each other, they didn't change their voice. They were still just talking to me as an audience member in the same way they would talk to anyone else. So that was incredible for me, and my first experiences getting to experience human interaction in a safe way. I would also say what's so awesome about theater and autism is, as autistic people, we are always examining all the social interactions happening around us, trying to replay them in our head over and over and over again, and trying to figure out everything that's going on in them so we can understand these social interactions. And when you are rehearsing theater or creating theater, everyone in the room is doing that. You are no longer the only person examining all the social interactions, because everyone is playing out these social scenarios and discussing, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? So it's really nice that all of a sudden the autistic people are not the only ones doing that work. We are all doing it together. Did that answer your question a little bit, I hope?
Yes.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say it's a really big honor for you to come here and discuss your life and your work with us. I don't know if I caught this earlier, but I just want to ask you, from one autistic performer to another, have you ever struggled doing theater? And if so, how long did it take you to do theater?
Yeah, such a good question. I struggled doing theater a lot. And I would say that struggle is not because I don't feel comfortable on stage or doing the work of acting. I think that my autism in so many ways has only made it easier for me to be an actor or to be rehearsing in a rehearsal room, I really love having clear roles and clear expectations, and theater gives that to me. I love knowing what to expect every day, and theater gives that to me because we are doing the same thing every day. Everything about theater, I think I script in my daily life, I script situations for myself that I can predict the outcome of. And that's my exact same job as an actor, is to say the same words over and over again and convince people it's my first time saying these words and that this is spontaneous and the first time this has ever happened. But I think the place that's made theater really hard for me is the expectation of others. When I was trying to convince people that an autistic actor needed to be considered for the role of Christopher Boone in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, this was what I think 2015, 2016, whenever the West End production was moving to Broadway is when I started this advocacy work. And the amount of people who, both within the theater industry and from not in the theater industry, the amount of professionals and producers who would plainly say, we wish we could cast the show this way, but this is just not a role that an autistic person could play. This is a big role with big words. Or the number of people who just truly didn't see the added value of including people with autism in shows that were about autism was astounding and so frustrating to me, and made me want to give up over and over again. And then even after I was casting Curious Incident, the number of people who thought, okay, but you're the anomaly, we were able to cast you in this role, but we couldn't cast other autistic. Just last year, I had a theater reach out to me asking me to play Christopher, and I was like, I think I'm too old to play that role now. I don't know that my body moves in those ways anymore. But let me give you suggestions of other awesome autistic actors who would be so great in the role. And the discomfort, because like, oh no, well, we know you can do it, but we don't know if you aren't available, we don't know if we can cast the show. That is what made theater frustrating to me. That is what made me want to give up. When I was working at National Disability Theater, working to partner with regional theaters, and I knew there would be a bridge there, right? Trying to bridge regional theater culture and disability culture. But I was always shocked that the bridge was so much larger. The bridge that needed to be built was so much larger than I expected. That made theater hard, and that made me want to give up. So I think so often it's not actually the work or the abilities or the tenaciousness of people with disabilities that's the issue, but it's the perceptions of the outside world that is often one of the biggest obstacles. Thank you.
I'm assuming we have time for one more question, is that right? 2 more questions, yay! If we don't get to answer your questions, Mickey and I are hanging out afterwards for a little while, so we will be here and happy to do that.
Hi there. I'd stand up, but I have a temporary injury, which is a real eye-opener to disability
Welcome
issues.
to our club.
I know it. As the lady downstairs pointed me to the stairs, I'm like, I can't do the stairs. So, real understanding. I'm Patricia Roberts. I am the sister of a brother with a developmental disability. I have witnessed his underemployment, his unemployment, and all of his challenges around the financial realm through the years. And I wanted to ask you, are either of you familiar with these new types of accounts, these 529 ABLE accounts that allow people for the first time who are disabled to put money in their own name and not have it count against them for SSI and Medicaid? I'm so thrilled of having stumbled upon them. I'm doing some advocacy around that, and I feel like members of the disability community are not even familiar with these plans, but parents of disabled children 6 years ago lobbied Congress and said, you're letting parents with kids who are likely to go to college save tax advantage? Let us save for our family no matter what their future holds. So these accounts are available. I feel like there's not enough, but I got my brother one. He's taken his money out of the shoebox that he was keeping cash in all these years, and he now has his first bank account, a debit card. He's learning all about that, and I'm terribly proud. So I just wanted to see if either of you were familiar, and to say what a relief it is to see some form of a path to some sort of financial independence for persons who maybe are on those benefits like my brother.
I am happy to weigh in here, although I would keep you for hours with a rant about how I feel about asset limits for disabled people, and how it keeps disabled people in poverty simply because they're disabled. And then people get mad at us because we're in poverty.
Yeah.
So it's a constant cycle. But in terms of the specifics of 529 accounts, I am connected with some people who are, very passionate advocates for them. I've done a podcast episode on it, and I really do encourage people to recognize that there are options out there so that disabled people can actually be in possession of their own assets. But even so, and I think this goes back to a broader disability rights note that I would want to leave people with tonight, that's still a separate but equal situation in very many ways. Disabled people are kind of fighting for crumbs to be able to have possession of our own money, right? That's what it comes down to. I think that, even as we're up here having this conversation, neither of us are, I would say, I'm not trying to speak for you, Mickey, but I would say neither of us are 100% thrilled with the financial situation that being disabled has put us in. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I was bagging groceries 2 months ago, so absolutely.
So that's the honest truth, but if you wanted to have a more specific conversation about that, I would be thrilled too, because I could talk forever about that.
That's how she talking about because of the work done by the NDSS.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I know do we have time for one more question? I saw 2 hands, so I'm not gonna look and someone else will pick.
I'm the same.
Hi, thank you. I just want to say I truly love, respect, admire both of you times a million. I am a public school teacher here in the city, not far from here. I teach all autistic students. My students have very high support needs. I am just wondering, they do not have the privilege of, for example, masking, not with cloth masks, but suppressing their autistic traits.
Right.
They are authentically, perfectly autistic for who they are. And I'm pretty much kind of wondering, what has masking been to you in your life? What is kind of the barriers, and how is that if it helped you with your Broadway, and also just the second part of this question, where within Broadway do you still see extreme ableism? Are there still barriers to break down? And kind of what do you feel responsible in any way in your advocacy work to continue to kind of tackle any of those barriers or speak for others? Thank you.
So for the first question, when I was going through theater school, I'm now 30, almost 34, but when I was in college, I did not mask nearly as well as I do now. I was always stimming. I carried a lot of tension all through my hands, all from like my neck down to my hands. And any class I was in, no matter what classes I took in school, whether I was in Chekhov class or Shakespeare class or viewpoints or voice class or any class I took, the only note I would ever get from my professors often was, you have to get rid of the tension in your hands if you're ever going to want to work professionally. I had a couple professors who would literally say, okay, before you do this monologue, run a lap around the building. Or who would say to me, when you do this, you should do this whole monologue seated so that people don't so I spent truly like 4 years in college just trying to reach a non-disabled neutral, which is really, really hard. And I think I got, after 4 years of working really hard at it, I think I got really good at it. I shouldn't have had to, but I did get really good at it after working at it for 4 years. But then when I got to do Curious Incident, it was so freeing that all of a sudden I could stim on stage. All of a sudden I could let all that tension come back in a really, really comfortable, natural way. And for the first time in my life, I got to be myself and it be truly accepted, which was so, so powerful. And to your second question, I don't really know anything, I don't know much about Broadway. I would say I'm so glad, when Ally Stroker got to win the Tony Award, what made me so happy about that is that she was not playing a disabled role. I would love to see when people think about diversity and think about creating shows with diverse casts, that disability is included in that vision of diversity, of what diversity looks like. Not just, because I think right now where we are at is that if someone is going to make a show or a TV show or a movie about disability, they know that ideally, hopefully, they should at least consider casting disabled actors for those shows and those stories. What I would love to see moving forward is that people are considering casting disabled actors for all shows or any shows and stories. That the story does not need to be about disability for us to cast disabled actors. That disabled people, that our disabilities are not always, every day, the only thing that are happening in our storylines. that we can have storylines about love, we can have storylines about murder, like anything under the sun, whatever is happening in a story, there's no reason that a disabled person couldn't be experiencing that. So I think that's the next step, is not only thinking about disabled folks for disabled roles, but thinking about the fact that any show that wants to have a diverse cast needs to be thinking about including disabled people.
So when Mickey said murder, what you all didn't know is this is a whodunit murder mystery party, and I kid, although that would
It's
be
the right
so-
room for it, though.
This
Oh my
is-
gosh.
that's true. I feel like we're in a real live game of Clue. I want to add super quickly before we wrap up. I hope I can maybe just clarify on masking, that we were talking not about the type of masking that we are all wearing and that I am going to put on as soon as we are done, but just to make it accessible, masking specific traits that we have and behaviors, right? I just wanted to make sure I was offering that clarity. Is that right?
Autistic people, masking is a word that autistic folks use when we are our whole lives trying so hard to hide any of our autistic traits, to try to hide our stimming, hide all of that. That's what we say is masking. Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah, so I just wanted to offer that, and also in regards to ableism in theater, I think you said exactly what I was going to say. Disabled people are whole human beings, and we live whole lives, and I have a lot of other interests beyond being disabled, although the people who know me wouldn't believe that probably. But
And that if you do want to tell a story about disability, I think the most interesting way to reframe it is, rather than telling a story about disability, is telling a story about ableism, is a really interesting, more powerful way to flip that and make it more exciting.
I couldn't agree more. So I appreciate you all being here to flip the script with us. I am so honored to have got to be in conversation with Mickey, to see this amazing crowd of people. Like, I'm gonna start crying if I say anything else, because it's just so lovely to see people care so much about disability conversations.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you.
Before I launch into my spiel,